Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're going to be doing a build that I've been meaning to do for a little while, but never really got round to it. We are going to be building a Pugilist type character. Again, one of those kind of unarmed fighters that doesn't necessarily feel like you're playing your kind of standard monk type thing. More of a brawler, a dirty fighter, somebody who just goes in and starts swinging. But I didn't just want to kind of do what I did before, which is when I made the pit fighter build, in which I made an unarmed fighter without using monk levels, going for a bunch of different tricks and game mechanics to make a powerful build regardless, and it was okay, but not the best. However, with this build, I am going to be taking monk levels and mixing them with bard. The plan with this build is to create a dirty fighter, a street brawler who does whatever they can to win, using manipulation tactics, magical trickery, and putting on a damn good show with their kind of performative style of fighting in order to be able to kind of get their leg up on the opponent, and again, maybe the illegal fighting rings where they do their combat, they are, you know, putting on a good show, making a lot of money, things like that. So mixing bard and monk is kind of an underrated multi-class anyway. You do need a lot of skills to make it work. Obviously dexterity, constitution, wisdom and charisma, all to make everything work efficiently, which in most cases would be impossible to do, but BG3 has a bunch of equipment that's going to help with that. We'll talk about that a bit more in a bit. And besides, making a bard monk is amazing because at the end of the day you get to call it a badonk. 90% sure I've made that joke before, can't remember where though. Anyways, so yeah, we're going to be mixing bard and monk today to create this manipulative, dirty showman type fighter. I'm calling it the street fighter because again, I feel like this guy is going to be one of those guys who will just have a fight with anybody who challenges them and then take them for all they're worth when he wins. He always bets on his own fights. And yeah, it's actually a really fun build at the end of the day. You're going to get a lot of power out of your martial capabilities, a lot of fun flair and roleplay, and you get to be a charisma-based monk, which I guess is kind of like inspired by College of Dance, but it means you're going to be great in dialogue and in combat, and you're just going to have a ton of fun kind of messing with the different aspects of this build. So, without further ado, let's get into it. You're going to kick things off as a bard. This is going to give you access to things like bardic inspiration, cantrips, and spellcasting. I'm playing as a human for this build for no particular reason other than I wanted the extra skill proficiency that comes from human, but it's not actually needed, so this is a pick your favorite type situation. Play any race you like with this build. The shorter races might have a bit of trouble with the movement speed aspect of things for getting in close range, but you will be able to patch that up with some of your monk features later on. So if you want to play any of the races, feel free, they all work. As a bard, we're going to gain access to 2 cantrips, and this build is surprisingly vanilla. There are going to be some things that we'll be taking from mods like Mistress Spells or the 1D&D Spell List revisions, which are available to all platforms, but this build is mostly vanilla focused, so you can build it completely vanilla if you want. As such, we're taking the 2 popular vanilla cantrips, Vicious Mockery and Friends. Vicious Mockery makes sense for this build as it is all about like insulting your opponent and goading them into attacking you recklessly, which causes them to have disadvantage on their next attack roll, which just feels perfect for a kind of a dirty fighter. You may be thinking, oh yeah, you're going to attack and then use this with your bonus action using the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. No, unfortunately that doesn't work with unarmed strikes, so we're not going to get to do that here. However, because we will be taking monk levels, you can still cast this as an action and then attack with your bonus action using Flurry of Blows, so you're still going to be able to weave this into your combat style quite frequently. And again, it's a decent ranged attack, psychic damage, very often not resisted unless you're up against mind flayers, so overall it works quite well. Next up, Friends, literally manipulating people to gain advantage on charisma checks against them. Obviously they can't be hostile to you, but at the time, this can help get kind of what you want out of your opponent before you actually fight them, or maybe avoid a fight entirely. However, you probably are going to want to fight them, but it's literally about social manipulation and dirty tactics, so we're taking it here. Next up for our spells, we have some pretty damn decent options. Thanks to the 1D&D spell list revisions, we do actually get access to the command spell for Bard. And I do think this works out quite well for us, commanding a creature to flee, move closer, freeze, drop to the ground, or drop their weapon. Now imagine this guy is in a fight, right, and it's looking like it's going to be a pretty amped up fight, and like the opponent is like a well-revered, like, street fighter themselves, they have a lot of pedigree, maybe they're like a champion or something, and this guy without you even realizing it, kind of whispers a command as they're getting up close and brawling, which causes their opponent to just do something that they didn't intend to do, creating an opening, and then bam, this guy knocks them down. So yeah, basically causing a creature to move in and out of your attack range, maybe for an opportunity attack could be nice, and then, you know, freeze or drop to the ground or drop their weapon. You know, all of this can work quite well. So I think command makes a lot of sense here. Speaking of whispering, though, we have Dissonant Whispers, dealing 3d6 psychic damage and potentially frightening a creature. They'll have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they cannot move, holding your opponent in place so you can just wail on them. Again, another fun spell that feels perfect for this build. Next up is Fairy Fire, a kind of almost like a flash grenade type move. I don't really know how else to say it. But imagine your opponent is suddenly lit up like a disco ball and you have advantage on all of your attack rolls against them. Again, Flurry of Blows is going to love this. Basically, again, it's kind of like just like making your opponent easier to hit. This one's kind of loose with the interpretation, so feel free to swap this one out for something like Charm Person, Sleep, Attach to Hideous Laughter, whatever you think is appropriate. And finally, Color Spray. It's literally pocket sand. It is the dirty fighting move. You blind creatures up to a combined 33 hit points in a cone in front of you. That's about 5 meters. Obviously, this goes up as you upcast it, but of course, you're up close and personal. Your opponent might be starting to get the better of you. You're knocked down to the ground, and you throw the pocket sand in their eyes, and they are suddenly blinded, which means you can hit them with advantage. Obviously, we have to have this one here. It's a staple of the build. As for your starting instrument, pick whatever you like. It really doesn't matter, because I prefer to use the whistling for this build. Like, so, you know, when you unequip a musical instrument as a bard, you just whistle instead, which I think makes a bit more sense for this build. You're not really going to be carrying a massive instrument on you while you're in a fighting arena, so, you know. And finally, the ability scores. As I said, we are going to be using stat boosting equipment in order to make this build work, as unfortunate as it is. Your final stats of the build, so you will be respecking at some point, are as follows. Dexterity at 16, this is just going to be our base dexterity for all of our attacks. Strength is at 8, but you can use Potions of Hill Giant Strength to bump this up if you want to, maybe going for some Tavern Brawler shenanigans with it. Constitution is at 8. By the end of the game, you will be going for the Amulet of Greater Health in order to push this up to a 23, and give you advantage on concentration saving throws to help with our bard spells. However, in the beginning, you're going to be swapping your dexterity and your constitution around. So popping your +1 here, putting your dexterity down to 8 and having your constitution at 16, because you're going to use the gloves of dexterity to push this up to an 18 instead, until you get your hands on the Amulet of Greater Health in order to swap these stats back around. Obviously, there will be a little bit of a problem when leading up until you get the gloves of dex. Even though you do get them in Act 1, you will obviously have an issue, so maybe just focus on the bard spells, the bard levels in the early game, or turn down your wisdom and pump up your dexterity instead, because you won't need your wisdom right away if you're wearing the light armor from bard. So, you know, just kind of use your better judgment on how you distribute your stats, but for the majority of the game, you will play like this until Act 3, where your final stats are going to look a bit more like this. All good? Good. So Dexterity is at 16, Constitution is at 8, Intelligence is at 10, we have a couple of extra points, and we might as well have a bit of Intelligence on this build. Wisdom is at 15, we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later, so we want it at 15 here. And finally, Charisma is at 16, because obviously it's going to be our main spellcasting stat for our bard spells. Now, skill proficiencies. You have access to every single one in the game. Of course, I've gone with the Charlatan background, which is going to give us Sleight of Hand and Deception. I felt like that made sense. And we're going to be taking Intimidation and Performance, as well as you can take Persuasion, with your bardic kind of skill proficiencies here, which is going to get you Intimidation, Performance, and Persuasion, so you have all of the Charisma skills right off the bat, as well as Sleight of Hand, because we're a high dexterity build. That is going to feel really nice. Your final skill proficiency that you get from Human can be put into anything. I like having Stealth, Perception, Insight, Acrobatics. Any of these can work. I think Acrobatics is good to have off the bat to prevent you from being pushed, which can be really good. And again, it fits into that kind of martial arts kind of fighter flavor. Otherwise, feel free to pick whatever you like. Stealth is obviously another really good option and is probably the preferred choice for most players. So pick your favorite. Next up at level 2, we're going to take a quick 1 level dip into Monk, as I said, to get those kind of Monk features early on. This is going to give us access to Flurry of Blows, meaning that we can make 2 unarmed strikes as a bonus action, but it's also going to give us access to our unarmored defense using our wisdom, our dex, which you might not use right away. You might stick with the light armor until you get a high enough wisdom score. after you jostle your stats around. Otherwise, it's still decent in the early game. We also have dexterous attacks, allowing us to use our monk weapons or our unarmed strikes with dexterity instead of strength. So if you want to use some of those bard weapon proficiencies with your monk, you can now use them with dexterity, which will be nice. So you can use things like longswords, rapiers, which will already use dex, but you get the point. So longswords, basically, which is nice. We also gain a bit of a bump to our unarmed strike damage, making it a 1d4 at this level, and if we make an unarmed strike with or make an attack with a monk weapon, we can make another unarmed attack as a bonus action. So if we're not using our bonus action that much, which we're probably not going to be anyway at this point, we basically have two melee attacks per turn, which is pretty nice. Or if we're willing to spend that key point for Flurry of Blows, we can cast a spell and then do two unarmed strikes as a bonus action. It's just enough of that monk flavor that we want in the early game to get us started. Now it doesn't really matter if we want to focus on the monk stuff or the bard stuff more, we have a little bit of both. Speaking of, it's up to you how you want to level this from here. You're going to end up with about the same levels in both classes, a 6-6 split, so it's up to you what you want to focus on more. Do you want the monk stuff first, or do you want the bard stuff first? I personally think getting the bard stuff first is going to be a bit more valuable. Because of how high some saving throw DCs get in the late game, you're definitely going to find a bit more value out of the bard stuff in the early game earlier on, because a lot of the enemies have low kind of saving throws, so you'll find that the effects tend to go off more often than not, and things like Song of Rest for the third short rest, Jack of all trades to get your proficiency in, like, half proficiency in all skills, like, it's going to feel very, very good, so I like to go with the bard levels first, get those control spells, and then when damage starts to become more of the main focus as you get later into the game, like kind of the mid to late Act 2 and then Act 3 and beyond, those monk levels are going to really start to come in handy then. So I would recommend going with the bard levels first, but if you want to just become really powerful as a martial fighter earlier, then go with the monk levels first. Entirely up to you, pick your favourite. So, at bard level 2, as I said, Jack of all trades and Song of Rest. Brilliant, no notes. We also do get to pick another spell at this point, and it's entirely up to you what you want to take here. Heroism, any of the healing spells, any of the spells I mentioned before, all of them would work. Bane, giving a creature a negative d4 penalty to attack rolls and saving throws, can also be really nice, although that does require your concentration, and we have quite a few concentration effects on this build. So, pick your favourite. It's entirely up to you what you want to grab. I do kind of like Charm Person on this build. Charm a humanoid, preventing them from attacking you, like lowering their guard for a bit, and then BAM! Go for the weak shot. So, the weak shot? The weak spot. Yes, that's it. Like, kind of like, imagine like a boxing match where your opposing boxer like lowers his face guard a bit and then just gets decked in the nose. This build is very violent when you actually put it in that context. Now, at level 3 of Bard, you get to choose your subclass. Now, most people will probably think, oh yeah, he's going to go with College of Swords. But the problem is the sword flourishes work with weapons, not unarmed strikes. So College of Swords isn't that useful to us here. Unless you do decide you want to go with a weapon, which is totally valid to you, then you absolutely could. College of Valor could also be good, but we're not exactly about helping out our teammates. We want to just help out ourselves. So College of Law is actually the way to go. College of Law is going to give us cutting words, allowing us to insult our enemies as a reaction to basically do the opposite of Bardic Inspiration, lowering their chance to hit, lowering their saving throws, all that sort of thing. So again, this build is about dirty fighting, and if we're using this and Vicious Mockery, we're literally insulting our opponents into getting our own way, manipulating their mind mid-battle. So I actually think College of Law is the best way to go here, which is a nice change. So I'm quite happy to pick this up here. It comes with a bunch of other stuff as well. We do get level 2 spells at this level, and it's up to you kind of what you want to pick here. Obviously, we get the standard level 2 spells. I like Blindness as kind of another way of doing the kind of Colored Spray Pocket Sand thing. It's not HP dependent, but it is a Constitution saving throw, so there's some creatures that may have trouble with it, but this doesn't require concentration. So it's up to you if you want to use this or Color Spray. Hold Person, obviously a very dirty tactic. Suddenly your opponent's held in place and you can strike them with critical hits. Again, as a monk with Flurry of Blows, that is very strong. Probably my main pick, especially since we do already have Color Spray. There's also, things like Enthrall, Crown of Madness, Invisibility if you really want to play dirty, but I feel like this guy wouldn't make it too obvious. I feel like a lot of his manipulations would be very subtle. So just suddenly turning invisible in the middle of combat, it's going to be like, well, yeah, he's obviously cheating. But otherwise, with something like Hold Person, where your opponent may just be held still for like a moment, then you get a quick flurry of blows in and then intentionally drop your concentration to let them go, and people are like, what just happened? It's like you hit him out of nowhere. Like, it's stuff like that, right? So I feel like hold person and things like blindness as well can also really work. But of course, with the Mistress spell mod and the 1 D&D revisions, we also do get a couple of other things, like mirror image. You move so quick that your enemies see you as a blur and they can't tell which way you're coming from or where to attack you, when in reality you're just making illusory duplicates of yourself. There's Aid to give yourself more HP. Again, these are from the 1 D&D spell list revisions. Then there's also the Mistress spells mod, adding the spells from other books, such as Pyrotechnics, creating fireworks that heavily blind or obscure, or that blind, you can choose to create fireworks that blind or create a smoke that heavily obscures you. Kind of like making a diet version of the darkness spell. There's Kinetic Jaunt, making you faster, Silvery Barbs, which is just the most broken thing ever, so pick your favourite here, but I do like hold person for the flavour that I gave it. College of Law Bard is also going to give us 3 extra skill proficiencies and 2 expertise. I like putting points into both Deception and Persuasion here to give us that nice +7, and then we do also get 3 skill proficiencies. So I'm going to go with Stealth, Perception, and Insight, because Insight's all about reading people, so you need to be able to read your opponent's moves, and obviously Perception lets you focus on your surroundings, so you're just a better fighter, and Stealth is Stealth. You never know when you need to get that sneak attack in, even though we're not a rogue, but hey-ho. Next up, at level 4, we're going to gain access to our first feat, as well as a few other things. We get another cantrip here, and I'm going to say, well, it's a pick your favourite thing. I like Minor Illusion or Mage Hand, because Mage Hand is just like, hey, we've got another hand. It's not exactly going to do punching, but you never know how you could perform plenty of dirty tactics with that. Or Minor Illusion is kind of my favourite choice, because it's literally, hey, look over there! What? And then you deck him one. You just get a sneak attack and you get a surprise attack, a low blow, so to speak, because it's literally a Minor Illusion. And you're like, hey, it's a cat! Because that's what it spawns in this game. We can also grab access to another spell here. It's up to you to pick what you like here. Really doesn't matter. I did pick blindness in my testing, so I'll go with that, but feel free to pick your favourite. We're also going to get to grab a feat at this point, and obviously we are focusing on the bard levels at the moment, but I do think at this point you would also have the clothing. That would mean you're going to be using unarmored defense. So I do think that maybe getting that half feat to bump up our wisdom would be worth it. Now, it's up to you. Obviously, if you're playing vanilla, you could take something like Magic Initiative Druid, Oh, not Magic Initiative Druid, what am I thinking of? There are various different feats that will allow you to bump up your wisdom, I think, but otherwise you can grab one of the spells from the feats from the Tasha's Feat mod, which is again available on all platforms and gives us a bunch of balanced feats from tabletop. It's up to you. You're going to be grabbing either Fey Touched or Shadow Touched. Shadow Touch will give you the invisibility spell as well as a bump to your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, and you can pick a level 1 spell of your choice from the illusion or necromancy school to use once per long rest or more if you have the spell slots for it. That would be a cool one. I mean, again, I kind of made a case against invisibility. Otherwise, you would have access to these spells here. But I do think Fey Touched is better, giving you access to Misty Step, which is always nice for martial characters to have. Give us that +1 to our wisdom, and we get to choose a spell from the Divination or Enchantment School of Magic, which, as you can see, there's a lot more options available to us. And I'm going to be picking Compelled Duel. You can cast the Compelled Duel spell once per long rest. So, the Compelled Duel spell is usually only available to paladins. It forces an enemy to attack only you, giving it disadvantage against other targets. This is literally you walking into a fight that you know you're going to win and blustering and goading your opponent into fighting you. I think it's quite a fun spell to use at the start, just making it so you can kind of lock in that one enemy to come after you, giving your teammates room to breathe and taking out the others. So I do quite like Compelled Duel here, both for the flavour and for the effects that it actually gives to the rest of the party. But there's obviously a few other things you can grab. Hex can be a very nice spell to have, as well as Bless, but I think that's less on theme. We already have Command and Dissonant Whispers and all that. Overall, I do think Compelled Duel is the way to go. We get our Wisdom up to an even level, we get Misty Step, and this, I think it's worth it. Next up, at Bard level 5, we're going to get Font of Inspiration, which is going to allow Bardic Inspiration to come back on a short rest, so now it recovers at the same rate as our Kai points, or Key points, whatever you prefer. And then we also gain a bump to our Bardic Inspiration, making it a D8 instead of a D6, meaning that our Cutting Words is now even more effective. We also do gain access to level 3 spells at this point, and we've got quite a few options available to us that work in our favour. There's things like Fear, making it so enemies are afraid of us. We can go for Glyph of Warding, literally setting a dirty trap on the floor, then we goad our opponent into stepping on it, and then boom! They get blown back by a detonation blast, or they get put to sleep because there's a sleep variant. There's a bunch of different things you could do with this that I feel is quite cool. There's also hypnotic pattern, literally hypnotizing your foe so that they cannot attack you, move, or act. There's things like stinking cloud if you want to be a bit dirty in the literal sense, but we do have some 1D&D spell list revisions, and I quite like the slow spell, which was added with 1D&D. This is going to allow you to target up to 6 creatures and slow them. Their movement and actions are affected, meaning that their movement is like cut in half, I believe, and they can only use an action or a bonus action per turn, not both. And their AC and dexterity saves are reduced by 2, meaning that all of our attacks are way more likely to hit. This is one of the best area of effect control spells. Being able to basically completely neuter 6 creatures is insane. Of course, there is a saving throw attached to it, meaning that you might not get everyone every time, and it is a wisdom save, which some things are good against, but otherwise this is just a great battlefield control spell. And it does feel great that you can kind of just force your enemies to slow down. Again, in like a one-on-one fight, if you're faster than your opponent, you're likely to take them down. So I do quite like it here. I would also say you could replace a spell from lower level that you feel like you're not really using as much. I would say you could probably ditch Fairy Fire at this point and pick up something a bit more useful. There are a few different things you can grab. Mirror Image is obviously quite good. I would probably recommend picking that up. And I did make a case for Glyph of Warding and Hypnotic Pattern, so I think those both work. Now, we are going to go to 6th level of Bard here. That is going to give us another level 3 spell that we can pick. I'm going to go with Glyph of Warding. But also, because we're a lore bard, we gain access to magical secrets, and oh boy, there's a lot to work with here. We get access to all the usual vanilla stuff, but you can pick up some fun stuff like Haste, which I think is very on theme for this build. Counterspell, again, also very on theme. Someone else is trying to use dirty tricks on you, you can just say no to them. Spirit Guardian's obviously very powerful to just get a bunch of damage in whenever you're close to an enemy, which you're going to be a lot of the time. Darkness, if you want to go for the darkness kind of devil sight thing, if you want to pick that up here, or you will have an option of going Shadow Monk later, so you could take it from there if you want instead. There's also things from Mistress Spells if you have this mod installed, which you should, because again, all of this is actually pretty balanced. You could get things like, Psionic Blast if you want to just be able to force people away. You can get things like, what else did I think was pretty cool? Jim's Glowing Coin, where you throw a coin to distract your enemies, and they have disadvantage on wisdom ability checks, which can be great for our ability checks, not saving throws, and suffer a -3 penalty to initiative rolls. You can remain hidden while casting the spell. That feels very on theme. However, there is one spell from the Mistress mod pack that I think is absolutely essential to this build, and it is Sense Vitals. Sense the vital points of all enemies within 12 meters. Attacks against sense enemies gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls, deal an additional 1d4 force damage on critical hits, and reduce the roll needed for a critical hit by 1. And you can remain hidden while casting the spell, and it can be cast while silent. It does use a concentration. However, you may be thinking, well, I mean, that's okay. Like, the critical hit reduction is nice. The extra damage on a crit is okay. The +1 to attack bonus, it's alright. But what's really the point? One word. Discombobulate. And I think I've explained enough. Right, moving on. That's it. That's level 6. At this point, we're going to be diving over to Monk, and we're going to be staying there for the rest of our levels. This is going to give us more key points, better unarmored movement, and patient defense, along with Step of the Wind, Dash, and Disengage. We have more movement, more defense through patient defense. It's great. Next up, at level 3, we're going to get to pick our subclass. I do think any of these could theoretically work, where the 4 elements will give you some extra kind of spell type stuff, if you want to get a bit more tricksy with it, with things like Fist of Unbroken Air. I would say Way of Shadow is another really good option here, giving you access to the Darkness spell, which I would say either Way of the Open Hand or Way of Shadow would be the way to go. The bonus action Hide to go for, again, those like dirty low blows. Passive Outtrace for better stealth checks. Darkness, so you can go for Darkness Devil Sight things if you pack the Eversight Ring, which I do recommend for this build if you go down the Shadow Monk route. More on that later. You would get Minor Illusion from this, so you can train that out of Bard when you eventually respec. You can also grab Silence, and since a lot of our stuff can actually be cast while silent, this is kind of fun. And also Dark Vision. I mean, we are a human, so we technically don't have it. But still, don't use this. It's pointless. Overall, I do think Way of Shadow can actually work really, really nicely. The shadow teleportation thing as well is great. I do think it fits like this build, but it's not quite the vibe I'm going for. I want Way of the Open Hand because at the end of the day, we still just hit people really goddamn hard. Even if we're using dirty tactics to get those hard-hitting blows, we still do hit hard when we do actually try. This is going to give us access to Flurry of Blows, Topple, Stagger, and Push, which is going to synergize nice with our monk abilities because we have a lot of ways of debilitating saving throws, which these will work with. Obviously, being able to knock enemies prone is great. Being able to stagger them, which is going to make it so they can't move, is also really nice. I mean, they can't take reactions, which is great if we need to disengage, as well as being able to push them away from us. Overall, you're probably going to be using Topple the most because knocking enemies prone is advantage for you and the whole party, so I would say a Way of the Open Hand just for the pure damage is going to work great. We're also going to get, at level 4, we're going to get Slow Fall and our next feat. Now, I will say that at this point you are going to take an ability score improvement. It's just up to you what you want to take it in. Dexterity, we're going to get a +2 already from our equipment, leaving it at 18, so I don't think we really need that. Wisdom, I would say, would be maybe the thing to upgrade, because I do recommend a piece of equipment that gives us +2 charisma, so you'd have 18, 18, 18 across the board, which I think is pretty solid. That's going to give you more unarmored defense, but if you want your bardic spells to be at their best, go for the 18 and then a total of 20 with the equipment. So overall, it's entirely up to you. We're basically going to be bumping up wisdom or charisma with this, so pick whatever you like. I'm going to go with wisdom. At level 5, we're going to get extra attack, finally. Again, you can go for this a lot earlier if you decide to take the monk levels first, but I think with the fact that we have bonus action attacks, flurry of blows, and a ton of really useful spellcasting, extra attack isn't as valuable early on in this build. It's just a nice bit of extra icing on the cake. But at this point now we are going to be a much more effective martial fighter, as well as getting Stunning Strike to possibly stun the targets. Again, we have ways of debilitating saving throws with this build, so we might actually be able to get stunned off way more often than you normally would, making it so your enemies cannot take actions, bonus actions, or reactions for that turn, which is insane. So overall, I quite like this feature. And finally, at Monk level 6, we get a pretty awesome capstone for the build. Our unarmed strikes are now going to overcome resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. We're going to get the subclass features manifestation of body, mind, and soul, allowing us to do different types of extra damage on all of our attacks, being necrotic, psychic, or radiant. I think most of the time, if we want to play into like this dirty mind manipulation tactics, we're absolutely going to be going with psychic damage. Until something is resistant or immune to psychic damage, then I would say probably go with manifestation of soul for the radiant damage. But the psychic damage just felt so in tune with the build, but I really wanted to include it here. We're also going to get Wholeness of Body, giving us a bit of healing every turn for 3 turns, regaining half of our key points immediately, some more resource generation, and we regain key points every subsequent turn, as well as having an extra bonus action for those 3 turns, meaning that now we can cast a spell, then do Flurry of Blows twice, or a Flurry of Blows and a bonus action attack. This allows us to open up our spellcasting mixed with martial options so much more, giving us way more freedom. So overall, I love this feature here, it just makes too much sense. And that is the build. Overall, what you're getting out of this is like basically kind of the best of both worlds when it comes to playing a monk bard. You're going to get a bunch of battlefield control spells like Command, Slow, Compelled Duel, Hold Person, Charm Person. You're going to get the ability to buff yourself up with things like Haste and Sense Vitals. You have a ton of battlefield maneuverability with Step of the Wind, a bunch of defense with Patient Defense, and Mirror Image and stuff like that. You just get so much to work with across both sides. You get a ton of martial capability out of the monk levels as well, and again, the idea of being this like dirty fighter is just so fun, where you get all of these abilities kind of melding together into one. Again, kind of using social manipulation and magical tactics to be able to get the upper hand in street fights. It's just such an interesting way of going about it. And again, there is room to kind of mess around with things like Tavern Brawler in this build if you want to find room for that somewhere. Maybe just the stats around a little bit and use Potions of Hill Giant Strength to get even more power out of this. But again, you get all the social aspects of being a bard and the utility that comes with that, like Song of Rest as well. You just get a little bit of everything with this build in a nice, fun, and flavorful package. You're still getting up to level 3 spell slots as well as 7 key points and 4 bardic inspiration points. basically these two resources coming back on a short rest, and also being able to use things like cutting words as well. It's just so nice. Obviously the spell slots being a bit limited is a bit of a knock against the build, but otherwise you're not really going to have a problem with that. So let's take a look at the equipment for this build. First up, for our weapon, well, we're just punching people. Again, it's going to deal a pretty decent chunk of damage. 1d6 plus 8 with an extra bit of psychic and force damage. More on that in a bit. But for now, we do have a ranged weapon on this build, which is the Bow of the Banshee. I bet you thought it was going to be the shot, but oh my god, I can't speak today, the Darkfire Shortbow, didn't you? Which you absolutely could if you didn't want to take haste from magical secrets. But this one allows us to, on a hit, possibly inflict Frightened, getting a 1d4 bonus to attack and damage against frightened creatures. We have a lot of ways of frightening our opponents, and no, this doesn't have to be attacks with the bow, it's any attack that we deal with, all the attacks that we deal with unarmed strikes and such. Yeah, this can go off quite a bit, and getting that extra bit of damage on all of our flurry of blows, like again, that's like a bunch of d4s there that we get to use, so it's nice just to have this equipped just in case. Next up, for our other equipment, for the hat we have the Birthright hat giving us a +2 to charisma. This goes up to 22, but for us it's going to either be 18 or 20 depending on how you build it. Next up, the Cloak of Protection, a bit better armor class and saving throws. What's not to love? We're also going to get the Graceful Cloth, allowing us to go for Cat's Grace, and increase our dexterity score by 2 to a maximum of 20. Cat's Grace is going to allow us to gain advantage on dexterity checks, and only take half damage from falling, but we already get that from slow fall, so that's neither here nor there. We also gain Nimble as a cat. You gain a +1 bonus to dex saving throws, and increase our jump distance a bit, so we get a bit more of that kind of monkish vibe. Next up, for our gloves, we have the Servitor of the Black Hand gloves. Your unarmed attacks deal an additional 1d4 force damage, and you get a usage of the Fear spell once per long rest. So, overall, that's going to work out pretty nicely for us. I know there's something with multiclassing about having how the most recent multiclass you took affects your item spellcasting stats, but since our wisdom and charisma are the same, it doesn't actually matter, so fear is going to work out either way. And force damage feels nice on this build. Again, it feels like using magic to manipulate things in your favour in a subtle way, because people would notice fire or ice or, you know, whatever quite easily, but force is a little bit more subtle, so I quite like it here. And finally, for our boots, we have the Boots of Uninhibited Kashigo, giving us additional damage on our unarmed strikes equal to our wisdom modifier. So for us, that's a +4 on all of our attacks. So for that, that's pretty good, but the early game equipment options that you'll have here are the Diadem of Arcane Synergy, which will allow you to, whenever you inflict a condition, which again, we can do quite a lot with our bard spells. You gain Arcane Synergy, which allows weapon attacks to deal additional damage equal to the affected entity's spellcasting modifier. Now yes, that does say weapon attacks, meaning that you will have to use a weapon if you want to get the most out of this, but it's one of the only really decent early game options for a build like this, so you might find yourself using a sword in the early game, but if you want to commit to the bit and not use this, then that's perfectly understandable. There's not really a specific piece of head equipment that I say would work, maybe the Haste Helm, but otherwise this is a pretty solid thing to get a lot of extra damage if you do decide to use a weapon. Our early game gloves are obviously the Gloves of Dexterity, later being swapped out for the Amulet of Greater Health, for the kind of stat boosting equipment of choice. So you're going to be getting these in the early game to have your dexterity score set to 18 before we need to swap the stats around. And then your early game boot option will be the Evasive Shoes, just giving you a +1 to your armor class. If you find that the extra damage from the Boots of Uninhibited Kashigo aren't really working for you, and you want that extra point of AC to round it out to 20, feel free to swap things around. As I already said, for the accessories, we have the Amulet of Greater Health, giving us a con score of 23, and advantage on con saves, meaning that our concentration for our bard spells is going to be pretty much undefeatable. We're also going to have the Eversight Ring. This is a free slot to put whatever you want in here, but if you took Darkness as a bard spell or went with Shadow Monk, this is required to make it so that you're immune to being blinded, so that you're not affected by your own Darkness spell. So, up to you if you want to take this or not, otherwise this is a free slot. Like I said, I did originally test this with the Bandit, the Mystic Scoundrel, and no, unarmed strikes do not let you use your enchantment and illusion spells as a bonus action, which sucks. I really wish that wasn't a restriction, but hey, it says weapon attack, and unarmed strikes technically aren't weapon attacks, even if you're making a melee weapon attack with them. Oh, this is the same conundrum as tabletop. If this was tabletop, I'd say it works, but we can't homebrew things here. As you get into the modding tools, which I'm not smart enough to figure out, I found. And then finally, this is kind of a fun one for like the lore. This is the Ring of Mental Inhibition. Whenever a foe fails a saving throw against one of your spells or actions, they gain mental fatigue for 2 turns, which means fatigue means that basically the affected entity would have a -1 penalty to wisdom, intelligence, and charisma saves for each turn remaining. So we make them fail one of our control spell saves, and then the subsequent control spell saves against those enemies are going to be even easier. Then once they have 5 or more turns of this condition remaining, they take 1d4 psychic damage and the condition ends. I like the idea that during the fight you're constantly berating and attacking your opponent's mind to the point where they just get more worn down over and over and over again until they just break. And then you win the fight. It's kind of like a lore thing, otherwise don't worry about it too much. And for an early game pendant to kind of work in place of the Amulet of the Greater Health, you can go for the Moondrop pendant. Basically, you're a dirty fighter, but when you're on the back foot, you're not immune to just getting the hell out of there and cutting your losses. So when you have 50% hit points or less, you don't provoke opportunity attacks, meaning that we don't have to waste a key point on disengaging as a bonus action. So yeah. Overall, this is quite a cool build. I do feel like you're going to get a lot of fun, flavorful interactions out of this. With this equipment, it's going to feel quite fun to play. For our camp clothing that you can see I'm using here, we have from the Fear Tailor's camp clothing mod, again, available to all platforms, the Monk Clothes accessory with the footwear version 6, which does give you spells, but we're just going to ignore that those exist. We're also colouring these in no particular dye, actually. This is the default colours for them, because I think it worked out the best. So yeah, that is the build, and like I say, you're getting a pretty decent powerhouse build out of this. By the time you're at the end of the game, you're going to have really great battlefield control, immense damage, a bunch of tanking capability, and just be a general jack of all trades, which most bards are, but you are a master of none. You don't get access to the higher level control spells, which are nice to have, especially things like Hold Monster, and you're not getting the most amount of damage possible out of your unarmed strikes, leaving them at a d6. But otherwise, it's not really a huge deal. You're still powerful enough in all aspects of the game to be good in a lot of different situations. And again, the kind of fun flavor that you get out of this, of being this like manipulating street fighter, is just really, really fun to me. I don't know, I just really wanted to build this concept, and it did turn into a strong build. Obviously, the biggest gripe with it is it is heavily reliant on stat boosting equipment, which may be better on other builds. But again, once you've kind of swapped out the Gloves of Dexterity for the Amulet of Greater Health, you can throw the Gloves of Dex on a different build, and overall the stats do still work out quite nicely. Again, a spread of 18, 18, 18 is really good, especially with that 23 Constitution that just looks beautiful. So overall, I'm quite happy with how this turned out. I think the vision that I wanted to achieve overall definitely came through. I did originally build this with the intention of using the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, which obviously was a big blow to the kind of idea of the build. Obviously, when it came out, that didn't work. But if you do want to go down that route, just use a weapon. Again, not really the thing I wanted to do with this build, but hey, it would work. But yeah, it's entirely up to you what you want to do there. Right. I think that's going to do it for me. I don't plan on keeping you all too long today, so I'm going to leave it here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.